It's The World This Week. The World This Week in partnership with the Daily Beast. Craig Kapitis is contributing editor to the Daily Beast. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Thanks as well to Vivian Walt, Paris correspondent for Time magazine. How's your week been?
Pretty good.
Pretty good. How's the week been for France 24's very own Kedivan Gorgistani?
Busy.
It's been busy. Yeah, you're no longer in Washington.
No.
All
back
right.
here.
Philippe Moreau-Chevrolet is columnist and communications consultant. How's your week going so far?
Very well.
Very well.
Yeah.
It's not over yet.
No.
You, by the way, can listen, like, and subscribe to The World This Week on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and other fine streaming services. First came the shock, then came the exodus. More than 3/4 of Nagorno-Karabakh's estimated 120,000 residents have fled since last week's snap offensive by Azerbaijan, overrunning that ethnic Armenian enclave. France 24 spoke with Liana, who fled through the Lachin corridor with her 6 children while her husband returned to help with the evacuation effort.
All I needed was my homeland. If they could not do anything to protect it, then all of this humanitarian aid is of no interest to me, because I left everything behind. I don't need any money, I need nothing.
Kedivan Gorgistani, the end of Nagorno-Karabakh?
Well, that's at least what comes out of that decree that was signed by the leadership of Nagorno-Karabakh that said that Nagorno-Karabakh would cease to exist starting on January 1st. So politically, it's the end of Nagorno-Karabakh, but we're seeing those numbers that you said about the population fleeing Nagorno-Karabakh. It's also pretty much the end of Nagorno-Karabakh as an ethnic Armenian enclave, because that population is simply deciding to, or being forced out of Nagorno-Karabakh and into Armenia.
Azerbaijan's president saying it's safe to stay, but there are signs that are not contributing to instilling confidence. The military detaining this Friday a former commander of the separatist forces. That's on top of Ruben Vardanyan, the former head of Karabakh's separatist government. He's been charged with financing terrorism after his arrest while trying to flee through that Lachin corridor. This was, Vivian Walt, a slow burn, and then all of a sudden, poof.
Well, that's what's so unsettling about the story. You have this essentially separatist, more or less autonomous region for 32 years that has suddenly kind of like collapsed within a matter of a week. And of course, the drumbeat behind all of this is the Ukraine war, because you have Moscow in a kind of weakened state that had always been able to kind of broker some kind of like status quo, and clearly is no longer able to do that, and neither is the US, apparently. So the big question is sort of where it goes from here and whether it has the potential to widen to the rest of the region.
Of course, there's two schools of thought on that, Craig Kapitis, because some saying that actually it was the loss by Armenia in 2020 that paved the way for all this. We'd had a 9-month blockade of Nagorno-Karabakh in that Lachin corridor, the only land route out. And really, whether or not this war in Ukraine is immaterial. What are your thoughts on whether or not Ukraine is a factor here?
Well, Nagorno-Karabakh is approximately 1,700 square miles of wretchedness between Muslims and Christians that stretched back for centuries. There's really nothing new here. And a little history here is very important. Fast forward to the Bolshevik Revolution in 1918. Nagorno-Karabakh, according to Lenin, was supposed to be part of the Soviet Socialist Republic of Armenia. And then, of course, Joe Stalin stepped in and said, no, 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 for whatever reason. And he cut out this little enclave. It was 21 or 22, 23. So, and these festering religious hatreds that have been going on for centuries continued to boil over until the present day, the wars that were going on there in the 80s and the 90s. And, since the whole affair is one of religion, the vanquished, the Armenians, are going to tell you that they're being exterminated. And where have we heard this story before?
Philippe Moreau-Chevrolet, is it at this point in time, is this intractable, or is there a way to perhaps break the cycle that Craig was describing?
We don't see a way, because there is no global player that can impose on the situation and can bring a global solution. There is no UN anymore, there is no US, there is no Russia, there is no major player that can trigger something or just intervene. That's the scary part in the situation, is that you don't have any stabilization anymore. And there is no stabilization possible, because nothing is stable anymore. So the thing is, we decided some years ago, some decades ago, to not play the UN game and to play our separate games. And now we're paying the bill, basically. There is no global stabilization possible.
Keep your eye long term here on Erdogan. They've the border between Armenia and Turkey has been blocked off, I think, since 1933. And if a peace treaty or agreement comes together here, Erdogan's going to step in. And
well, let's talk about that for a second. Azerbaijan insists it's got no more territorial designs. Still, President Aliyev's conciliatory words coming with an interesting choice of location to speak. On Monday, he flew to Baku's own big exclave. It's called Nakhchivan. Aliyev insisting he absolutely won't try to take the Zangezur corridor by force. This is the wrong map. The Zangezur corridor, which links that exclave to the rest of Azerbaijan. Aliyev had invited his Turkish counterpart, Recep Tayyip Erdogan, who said that if Armenia does not allow the trade corridor to pass through its territory, then it's okay, he said, Craig, we'll go through Iran instead. He wasn't being, in this particular case, particularly adversarial towards Armenia.
No, he's not. He would like to get a toehold in Armenia, even though the Armenians say that, the Turks.
So he'd rather do business with them than make war?
Well, yeah, Tayyip is at the end of the day, he's a smart fellow. He's a cunning fellow, and I think if he can cut a deal with the with the Armenians and the land borders open, and he's got the Azeris in his back pocket because they share a similar language, culture, etc. This is all part of Erdogan's grand plan to create a new region, to recreate what he says, not my words, the Ottoman Empire. He has stated this over and over, and for him, this is just another, way to do that. See, I'm even bringing in the Christians because the Ottomans did the same thing. That's how he thinks.
Kerevan?
I just want to go back to something you said about Russia being unable because they were busy elsewhere. There's also a part of the Russia-Armenia relationship that is maybe also they were unwilling to intervene because you've seen the relationship between Russia and Armenia slowly disintegrate over the last few years, basically since Nikol Pashinyan arrived in power in Armenia. And he has started slowly to turn a little bit westwards, and Russia was seen as the sole protector of Armenia for a long time. With Pashinyan and this turn towards the West, that has angered the Russians. And if you look at some of the comments that came out of Russia in the past week, you had the foreign ministry, you had the former President Medvedev saying, well, this is what happens when you flirt with the West, of course, referring to Armenia doing joint exercises with the Americans. All of these relationships that Nikol Pashinyan is trying to build in the West has also angered Russia, and Russia is maybe a little bit saying, well, you want to look westwards? Ask them to help you.
Yeah, Moscow blowing hot and cold. This Friday, both Armenia and Azerbaijan represented at a CIS meeting of former Soviet states. This was in Tula in Russia. Moscow, which still has peacekeepers in Nagorno-Karabakh and which objects to Yerevan's claims that it's failed in its obligations as guarantor of the peace, as Kerevan was saying.
We categorically disagree with the attempt to place responsibility on Russia, especially on the Russian peacekeepers. who are showing real heroism in carrying out their functions under the mandate. No one can reproach the peacekeepers for doing something wrong. We will never accept that. Armenia remains our ally.
Armenia remains our ally. Philippe Moreau-Chevrolet.
When you're forced to say that, it means that there is obviously a problem. I love the expression Russian peacekeepers. They are very good at propaganda. You can give them that.
Great at peacekeeping.
Yeah.
Russian peacekeepers, come on. That's pure communication.
I mean, there have been instances where some of those coming out of Nagorno-Karabakh have said that those peacekeepers have helped them, but mostly, though, there's a lot of hostility toward them.
Yeah, I mean, not to extend the kind of Cold War theme too far, but, I think one of the most telling images of the last few days is of the U.S., flying in two top officials to meet the representatives from both Armenia and Azerbaijan, and just looking completely impotent, essentially, like very marginal characters, even though Azerbaijan is actually, among other things, a major oil producer. It's a key producer for Europe to try get away from Russian oil supplies. And so, it's...
And members of the European Parliament have been critical of European capitals, saying that because they're turning more towards Azerbaijan's oil and gas, that they've given Baku a free pass.
Exactly, right, exactly. I mean, essentially they're trying to, create a kind of situation where Baku can step in and fill a kind of void, which they now have to fill. And essentially it's going to be quite a kind of compromise deal, of course.
A week ago at this time, we were commenting on Kyiv's increased use of long-range weaponry. And now, with U.S. ATACMS missiles being pledged, the Ukrainians are saying they're being bolstered. We also had special forces at the start of the week in Kyiv claiming that last week's attack on Crimea wiped out Russia's top brass there, 34 officers, including the commander of the Black Sea Fleet. Then, Russian state media published images of Admiral Viktor Sokolov, first in a video link meeting chaired by Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu. Then, on Wednesday, a story dateline from Sevastopol where Sokolov hands out medals to the Black Sea Fleet football team for their performance in a Russian armed forces tournament that had taken place 9 days earlier.
The awards ceremony that took place today should have happened a few days ago, but it was cancelled for unknown reasons. Can you comment?
No, it was cancelled just because we were busy and we had to postpone it for a few days.
But still, can you speak a few words to the residents of Sevastopol about what happened to reassure them?
Nothing happened. Life goes on. The Black Sea Fleet achieved the tasks that the commander set ahead of time.
Looking at those images, Craig Kapitas, are you convinced that Ukrainian special forces got it wrong and that Viktor Sokolov is alive and well?
The curious incident of Admiral Sokolov's unidentified body parts. That's what the Ukrainians actually said. They're still not sure. And the reason, according to Ukrainian officials, is that his body was so fragmented, their word, not mine, fragmentation of body parts was the quote from the ministry, that this is why they weren't sure. So I say this is a case for either Sherlock Holmes or Vivian Walt. I think we need to get all those...
I mean, the questions of that journalist were pretty specific, even though they don't directly say, were you bombed in the by the Ukrainians? It looks convincing.
It does look convincing, but
if you look at if you look at the footage of the damage done by those long-range missiles, I mean, the building was pretty much obliterated. So it's hard to know where he was handing out medals. Of course, he could have been handing out medals in any other grand building in in Crimea, but
We need him to stand in front of a camera with, the
with that
newspaper
day's
of the day,
newspaper, exactly.
and we will believe that he's alive. You can fake these images very easily.
What were your thoughts when you're looking at those
The questions
images?
were specific, but you don't see the people asking the questions. It could be forged. It could be doctored. We can do things with IA now that is very credible, and we could even have him talking. And you would have the impression that he is alive. To some extent, it's possible nowadays.
Russia has a lot of generals and admirals. U.S. generals and admirals, general grade officers, there's only about 800. The Russians have close to 1,300.
But it's also
so there's a lot more the Ukrainians can go for.
It's also very possible that the Ukrainians lied or made a mistake. I mean, it's a war. I mean,
shocking.
Per definition, you lie.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Lie is the common thing, and truth is the exception. We should all live by that standard.
You raise an excellent point.
I think that we're
Jeff.
forgetting the fact that Ukraine clearly pulled a pretty major hit
Yeah, sure.
on the Black Sea fleet, which is big.
And
Whether
we
or not
don't care about this admiral,
Sokolov is
really.
alive or dead.
Yeah, we don't care about that.
Right,
It was-
exactly.
yeah.
And Elena Voloshin, who does our Scene from Russia segment, saying that there's been no mention of the Ukrainian attack. I don't know if that speaks tomes, but certainly Ukrainian on Russian state media, but there have been official comments out of Moscow, and they didn't miss their target in denouncing last Friday's attack.
On the 22nd of September, Sevastopol was once again under attack. There is not the slightest doubt that the attack was planned in advance using Western intelligence assets, NATO satellite equipment, and reconnaissance aircraft, and carried out in close coordination with the American and British intelligence services.
Craig Topitas.
Yeah, well, she reminds me of a turkey we once had who drowned looking up at the rain. Anything that comes across Russian TV. Why do we even run it?
But she's saying it's in coordination with NATO allies.
I don't pay any attention to anything that's on Russian TV because it's all propaganda. If you want to look at what she's saying from a propaganda standpoint,
In this case, it wasn't TV. This was the Russian Foreign Ministry briefing to journalists.
same thing. It's on TV. They were right. They ran that out on the evening propaganda news hour with the goofy weatherman saying that we should now once again send nuclear weapons to blow up London. It's all propaganda. It's a propaganda war. And remember, it's the victors who tell you, what the war crimes are here.
But I mean, sorry, I'm again interrupting you, but I think that one really important thing that's come out of this is that really for the first year of the war, everyone kind of ignored Crimea. And even as, Western governments were talking about how, the exit from the war and how we're going to put together a peace deal, no one would actually spell out whether or not this was going to include Crimea. And now the war has increasingly involved Crimea, and Zelensky has made it absolutely clear he won't countenance a peace deal without Crimea.
And it's not over yet, because that clip also a reminder that the ATACMS are coming, those U.S. long-range missiles, Ketevan Gorgistani.
Well, if that's confirmed, but there seems to be a movement where the White House might be approving these ATACMS, these long-range missiles. And it goes back to what we just heard from the Foreign Ministry, which is the involvement of the United States, of NATO directly. If you have ATACMS, long-range missiles, that means the possibility of striking deep within Russian territory. I'm not talking about Crimea. I'm not talking about the east. I'm talking about positions way beyond that are officially Russian territory. And for the whole duration of this war, the Americans have been very clear, have always said, we don't encourage, we don't enable strikes by the Ukrainians within Russian territory. Now there seems to be a little bit of a change in position, or at least in wording. Antony Blinken said a couple of weeks ago, he was asked about those ATACMS and about striking within Russian territory, and he said the targeting decision is theirs, talking about the Ukrainian, not ours. So it looks like maybe the Americans are starting to position themselves to be within the
Or if, as Philippe Moreau-Chevrolet was saying, that could just be the rhetoric they're putting on display for the public, and they're still telling him in private to...
That is possible, but then it is still the attackams, and you're still within the policy of the Americans is we don't want to do anything that will escalate. And then you hear the foreign ministry saying they're getting involved, they are involved, but at the same time saying attackams, Abrams tanks, none of this is going to change anything on the ground. Is what the Russians are saying.
So what is escalation? A brand new EU weapons procurement scheme off and running this Friday with 7 EU nations which have announced they are ordering ammunition. The scheme is to get urgently needed 155mm artillery shells to Ukraine and replenish depleted Western stocks. Philippe Moreau-Chevrolet, your thoughts on this, the fact that there is this gradual buildup, and as Vivian was saying, the theaters of the war are expanding.
Yeah, we are in a Cold War, and we are fighting against Russia, whether we admit it publicly or not. And if you look at the position that the French President Emmanuel Macron has developed, he's been from a kind of a trying to be neutral position, talking with Putin during the night, having nice calls, and trying to solve the problem all by himself to a more resolute anti-Russian position.
Yeah, he sent his defense minister this week.
And his wording has started to be really aggressive against Russia and more pro-Western. So we can observe that the neutral, trying to get things right position at the beginning is not the position we have now. And it means that we are escalating naturally, and there will be only one winner, and it should be us rather than Russia from the French perspective.
Why did Emmanuel Macron change?
Because he's a devious politician?
No, but why did he trying to be the...
That was not a general question. We're talking about Russia.
No, but why did he go from being conciliatory, trying to be the guy who mediates, to now having a hard line?
Well, if one of the 2 French journalists who interviewed him last week on French television might have asked that question, which they didn't because they were obsequious as usual, we might have an answer. I have no idea why Macron is doing it. What I do know is there have been Ukrainian special ops going on in Russia for the past 8 months. We've reported on it in the Daily Beast. What I do know is Macron and everyone else can send the Ukrainians as much ammunition as they want. It's not going to do a bloody damn thing until there is air support to take out these ground positions. This war is going to slog on and slog on and slog on, and that's just the way it is until someone gets the cojones to bring in air power. And whether that happens, that's a big decision. We've written on this extensively at the Beast, and the gamble is if you do that, are the Russians going to go nuke? And the general consensus at the CIA and in French intelligence is that the Chinese will not allow that to happen. I don't know if that's right or wrong, but that's the consensus.
Vivian Walt?
I think if you look at the war maps of Ukraine, basically this war has not moved in 10 months.
Correct.
Nothing has happened, except that thousands and thousands of people have been killed on both sides. But if you look at territory, neither side has advanced anything. And so at some point, something's got to give. And I think the West realizes and Ukraine realizes that they are racing the clock here. If you have Trump back in the White House, if you have simply Congress just getting sick of, pouring billions into Ukraine with no real advance, then you've got a real problem.
And Brussels and Washington might have a new bother from Slovakia. It votes in a general election Saturday, and if the former Prime Minister Robert Fico returns to power, he's vowed to pull Bratislava's military support for neighboring Ukraine and to warm ties with Moscow. One of the nations that borders Ukraine possibly turning away from it. Again, this war fatigue that we had so long predicted, Kerevan Gorjestani, is it finally happening?
I think it's a hard question to tell because at least if you look, for example, I'm taking the example of the United States. Yes, you're seeing a gradual, slow change in the polls of people's positions on should we send more aid and more weapons to Ukraine. But if you look at it in another way, which is that after so many months of this war, after billions of dollars of American money sent to Ukraine, you still have a majority of Americans who say, yes, we should send them more. Yes, it's going down, but you still have quite a lot of support. And I can't really remember so many things on which a majority of Americans agree on spending money on.
All right. And speaking of the United States, not every day you see a U.S. president walking a picket line to support a strike. In fact, never before is the correct answer. Joe Biden traveling to Michigan, where the United Auto Workers, the UAW, is expanding its shutdown to all three of the big U.S. automakers.
The fact of the matter is that you guys, the UAW, you saved the automobile industry back in 2008 and before. Made a lot of sacrifices. Gave up a lot, and the companies were in trouble. But now they're doing incredibly well. And guess what? You should be doing incredibly well, too.
Philippe Chevrolet, France's left hasn't fared very well of late.
No.
What lessons can they learn from Joe Biden on a picket line?
To learn what is the real deal. And the real deal is not getting to the far right like everyone else in order to try and catch the popular votes, which won't happen. It's to take care of the people and the working class. And that's exactly what Joe Biden is doing. It's brilliant on the part of Joe Biden. It's brilliant because he's talking to exact same basis that Donald Trump wants to catch and often succeeds in catching. So it's a brilliant move. And these images are great for him. And in France, we should maybe try to understand that logic. But the left is really divided. It's like it's impossible for them to talk with each other. They've lost track of their own fights.
So Joe Biden,
they are lost in translation,
who has made his big pitch to trade unions, a comeback of the unions. Biden followed by a day to Michigan by Donald Trump, the Republican frontrunner, foregoing a second candidates debate on Wednesday to visit a non-union auto parts maker outside Detroit, but also to court those striking workers.
Sure.
To the striking workers, I support you in your goal of fair wages and greater stability, and I truly hope you get a fair deal for yourselves and your families, but if your union leaders will not demand that Crooked Joe repeal his electric vehicle mandate immediately, then it doesn't matter what hourly wage you get. It just doesn't make a damn bit of difference, because in 2 to 3 years, you will not have one job in this state. And you've seen it happen before.
So if you make the switch to electric vehicles, you will lose your job.
I mean, there's sort of echoes of this, as you know, when
Did you think
said,
EVs, as they're called, would be part of this sort of culture war?
It's hard to imagine. Then again, it's hard to imagine a lot of what comes out of Donald Trump's mouth, including...
If we lose the support of Elon Musk, if we lose Elon Musk's support.
That's it. Him sort of saying to coal miners that, you know, we'll bring back coal. What world is he living in? The world has moved on.
Does he have traction, though, by saying that?
But he has one point, and it's smart that he's pointing this out, because one of the key issues between the unions and the auto industry is what happens to those jobs when the electric vehicle transition happens. True. And part of it is, will these jobs be unionized? That is one of the key questions during these negotiations. So the fact that he's pointing specifically to that is Donald Trump being Donald Trump, but it's also hitting where there is disagreement. And he's also, we heard that in that soundbite, trying to drive a wedge between the union leaders and the workers. He's trying to portray Joe Biden as Union Joe, as in Union Leader Joe, and not you, the worker. That's what he's trying to do when he goes to a non-unionized place and trying to do the split screen. And he's trying to attack Joe Biden on his biggest weakness, if you believe the polls, which is the economy, because you look at the polls, that's where he has his worst numbers. And so he is trying to really focus on the economy, on Bidenomics, on, look, you're not happy with his economic plan, I will be your savior.
Craig Kapitas.
Well, I look at those two videotapes and I have a question. I mean, in a country as big and diverse as the United States, why is America only able to come up with a fascist grifter and a guy who's too old and too nice to run for president? Why is this? And I don't know the answer.
It's called
maybe
party
you've been there for a while. Maybe you're still in decompression from having had to live in Washington for so long.
But hasn't that ship sailed?
I mean, we're supposed to say what you hear them say is appeal to our better angels. I think the better angels are the ones who are on strike, not the auto workers. Why is this? Tell me.
But the ship has sailed, hasn't it?
Of course. And,
I mean, they're the heavy front runners. In fact, Donald Trump was supposed to go to a debate that night. He said, no,
exactly.
I don't need to.
Just to pick up on what Ketavan was saying, I mean, actually, I was in a Tesla factory 6 months ago or so in Berlin. If you've been to an auto factory any time lately, it is totally automated. It's robots everywhere.
Even when it's combustion engines.
Even less so with internal combustion engines. But EV factories are robot factories. You don't need a whole lot of people to build an electric vehicle. It's not like there are a whole lot of moving parts. It's basically a computer with four wheels. And this is the real problem for the whole industry, in fact.
The United Auto Workers strike, also a reminder that this won't be the same campaign as in 2020. Right now in the U.S., industrial action abounds, just as writers this week settled their dispute with the movie industry. Over in Hollywood, culinary workers over in Las Vegas have voted to walk off the job if need be. There's no date yet set for the stoppage that could hit casinos. And post-pandemic, it's going to be a very different campaign, Philippe Moreau-Chevrolet, in 2024.
Yeah, and Joe Biden is trying to endorse the anger of the people. That's what Trump succeeded to do in the last campaign. The fact that Joe Biden tries to do it is quite clever. And I wanted to add concerning the e-vehicles, they are also the symbol of the elites because they are quite expensive yet. So it's also something he plays on. I think he wants to divide the attention of the people between the elite and the people. But if Joe Biden endorses the anger of the people while he is the incumbent president, if he manages to do that, then he has a strong position, I think, because the space that Trump will have left is not very,
Philippe,
good.
I'm going to have to disagree with you on that. What Donald Trump did was he found out what people hated, and he made them hate it more. That's fascism. That's how you do it. You know that. What's Joe Biden trying to do? Trying to find out what people like and make them like it more? You talk to people within the Democratic Party, and I'm sure you have in the time you've been there. A lot of people are angry that he hasn't gone for Trump's jugular.
You don't win elections by promising hope anymore. You're winning elections by playing on the divides and being the best ones at dividing people. You're the one dividing, you're the one winning. And what I'm saying is that if he manages to be the one dividing instead of Trump playing this division game, he will win. Macron is the king of division. Believe me, we know what it is.
I don't know about division, but definitely one issue on which the Democrats and Joe Biden have succeeded in tapping, not in dividing, but in tapping somebody's anger to motivate them to vote, is abortion. We saw it in the midterms. It was clearly in some states a huge savior for the Democrats because that red wave in part was kept by the people being people who didn't really want to vote. You're talking about Joe Biden being old, people who are saying he's not exciting, but some of these issues motivate Democrats the way other issues-motivated Republicans.
And what worked in 2022 will work in 2024 for them?
They're at least trying to do that. They're keeping abortion on, they're talking about it. You're seeing groups in different states, key states, who are trying to put things on the ballot that have to do with abortion so that people go to the polls. So they're hoping to replicate. Will it work? I don't know.
Before we go, it was already a hot-button issue before the school year began in this country. And then during the first week of classes in France, a 15-year-old pupil at a vocational high school outside of Paris took his own life. Already last December, his parents had alerted his school that he was the victim of persistent bullying. France's First Lady, herself a former teacher, made the trip earlier this month to Poissy, that's west of the capital, to meet with authorities and with the family of a 15-year-old Nicolas. This week, on the eve of the government's announcement of measures to combat school bullying, the education minister got up and spoke in Parliament.
Marion, 13 ans.
Marion, 13 years old. Evel, 11. Dina, 14. Ambre, 11. Luca, 13 years old. Thibault, 10. Chanel, 12. Marie, 15. Lindsay, 13. Nicolas, 15 years old. These names are children taken from their families. They are pupils taken from their teachers. They are young people taken from their country by the scourge that is bullying at school.
Yeah, more than a half dozen names in the past couple of years. And the member of parliament whose question he was answering had her own story to tell.
Je ne crois pas être la seule sur ces bancs à avoir été victime de harcèlement.
I am convinced that I'm not the only one here to have been a victim of bullying. It hits one child out of 4, but how many actually dare to speak out? Being bullied at school is an inner trauma. It kills. Some bury it deep inside for their whole life. Being bullied at school has repercussions beyond school walls.
Mary, 15. Lindsay, 13. Nicholas.
Yeah, when you listen to that clip, Vivian Walt, she said that she'd been bullied at school 40 years ago, and it was still ingrained in her brain. And this is a topic that really has caught this nation's attention.
This is a totally heartbreaking issue. Nobody can listen to that without being utterly moved. That is without a doubt. I do have some problems with it, which is, this is not a new issue. As, the delegate said herself, she was bullied 40 years ago. I also find that the minister kind of has been latching onto these issues to kind of move people very viscerally while really not touching some of the real deep problems that he's got to confront.
Such as?
I have a child in French school. I can give you a very long list. In fact, the same school that the minister graduated from. The schools are, the standards of French education is slipping down the rankings, down the global rankings, has been for years. It's old-fashioned, it's ossified. They haven't managed to innovate. You go into a school classroom, it looks just like it did during the 1950s.
So as a result, they're not equipped to deal with school bullying in the age when you have cyberbullying, for instance?
Well, you have cyberbullying, and yet, the one innovation that the French school system brought in the last few years was giving every child an iPad and putting all school books on the digital platform, so that school kids are now constantly online, whereas before they weren't. I could go on and on, but...
Vivian's right. I had 2 sons who went through the system here. And you're right. And by the way, you had an excellent debate on this issue earlier this week that anyone who's interested in this should look it up on the France 24 website. It was really, really informative.
And actually, to catch up on this, one of your guests actually said something, and you were mentioning this representative who was talking about what happened 40 years ago. I'm old enough to have avoided having social media while I was in middle school, high school. It's not the same as 40 years ago because, as one of your guests said, 40 years ago, 20 years ago, you could be bullied at school, of course. You left school, the bully was away. You're taking your bully with you now, in your pocket, with your phone. It follows you at home. It follows you even with your friends outside of school. It follows you in sports. You're with it 24/7.
So among the measures put forth by the government in the ensuing announcements, one of them was confiscating phones or suspending accounts or having a ledger with the public prosecutor's office. What's feasible, what's not, Philippe Moreau?
We don't know. There has been a deluge of announcements made by the government. We are waiting, for the smoke to go away, and we will know what is feasible. It's difficult to know because you're infringing on individual liberties, and you can't, put a rule in place when the emotion is so high. We need to calm down.
Do you feel as though the government understands what Ketevan was saying about the fact that, especially, and I know that educators say it's a particular problem if the person doing the bullying is not from the same school?
It's of course a problem. It's a problem that we have to tackle. But that's, as Vivian said, that's not the main issue that we have with education now. As tragic as it is, we have a systemic problem. And this is not being talked about. And from the beginning of this, from the beginning of September, the Minister for the Education has been talking about the Muslim problem and this bullying problem. These
the Muslim problem, you mean that ban on the habaya?
And these problems are real, no doubt about this. Okay, we have to tackle these issues, but it shouldn't take so much space because we have incredibly huge problems in the educational system, starting from children being unable to choose which, studies they will do later. They can't choose. They can't even write their name down in the system that is supposed to, help them getting there. There are really problems with, money. The funding is not good enough for a lot of schools to be well maintained. I am living in the center of Paris. My kids are very happy. We have the best school ever in the public system. But a lot of people are leaving the public system, including now in the higher education, because there are no fundings anymore. This is a situation that should be talked about more extensively, and we should have a clever policy set in place. And it won't happen if we go from one debate on the abaya to a debate on bullying to a debate on whatever will come tomorrow, because there will be another thing coming.
Too many micros, not enough discussion on the macro.
The problem we have also is that the Élysée, the president, has decided that it was, for the first time in French history, education is something that the president wants to deal with by himself, and the first lady is very much involved.
What do you mean by himself?
He said that it was his domaine réservé. I don't know how to.
So it's not the education minister, but it's his portfolio, basically.
The education minister is like a deputy minister, and the real minister is the president. And it happens a lot nowadays, but especially in education. And the problem is that it's at the same time, as Macron would say, very good, because then it's the priority. We have been talking about education since basically the beginning of September again. And it's also a very bad thing because obviously you can't deal with such a big problem from l'Élysée, from the top. You have to have a general discussion involving all the parties involved.
I think I agree with you with the micro and macro, but I think one of the reasons why this latest case, and as tragic as the suicides before that were, they didn't spark the same reaction. One of the reasons this one really stuck is the reaction of the rector.
Sure.
That is what happened. What happened was
the school board
this child did what many children don't do. They spoke up. They talked about it at school. They talked about it to their parents. The parents went to the school. And then they sent a letter, and they received a letter back saying, your allegations of bullying, so first of all, we don't believe you. Second of all, we might sue you for making false accusation. And third of all, you're not being constructive by saying that your school is not doing what it should do for your child.
And I think the ministers disavowed the school board over that.
But I think that reaction also sparked this reaction nationally, and why maybe we're talking about it so much is that letter was so horrific for families, for kids, for everyone who has possibly been bullied and who was thinking of talking and seeing the reaction. So maybe that is part of the reason why it's become such a...
I think it's somewhat predictable, actually.
Yeah, that was the template.
And I think that the minister then, I mean, did not forcefully enough say this is not the way schools... He turned it into a question of cyberbullying. This is a question of top-down
how
education,
to deal with it,
in which kids feel powerless, they feel they cannot speak out, and they can't speak out in class, they can't, they are basically made to keep quiet and follow the program.
And then the administration will not believe them.
How to empower those children is certainly a salient topic, and we'll be broaching it. We're out of time. I want to thank you, Vivian Walder. I want to thank Vidi Molshevole, Keravan Gorjestani, Craig Kapidis. Thank you for being with us here in The World This Week.